Joining us now, a Freedom Caucus member, frequent guest on our show, been a stalwart conservative and defender of the truth and justice for a very long time, Alabama Congressman from the Huntsville area, Mo Brooks. Congressman, great to have you, sir.
Pleasure, John.
You know, Congressman, my wife, I've been married to her a long time. She always says this to me. Timing is everything. I never quite knew what that meant because it always, it was always something, right? Timing is everything, which was always, my timing is bad. But my timing today, having you on the show, perfect. So timing is everything because last night we understand Vice President Pence met with several members of the Freedom Caucus. They have a new repeal and replace plan. Are you at liberty to share any of that with us, sir?
Well, first, there's not a plan. We did have discussions. For example, I offered to the Vice President that I would vote for this bill that I believe is overall bad for America if a major change was made that would make it more palatable, and that is that the states would have an absolute right to decide what insurance policies must cover in their states. And those states who want to cover everything in the moon, that want to require Granny to have maternity insurance and want to pay higher premiums as a result, they can do that. But those other states that do not want to limit freedom of choice, that do not want to mandate all these different coverages that people don't want, well, they can not require them, thereby lowering premium costs for health insurance in those states. So that's what I offered. The president offered something similar to that. He did not want, the Vice President, Mike Pence, he did not want to make a statutory change that would guarantee states' rights. Rather, he wanted some kind of regulatory framework whereby states could petition for waivers to have more control over what must be in their insurance policies. And the administration would tend to look favorably upon those requests from the states. But, of course, that's only as good as this president. If you get a different president, they may decide that it's best to govern from Washington, D.C., and deny states and individual citizens the right to decide for themselves what ought to be in their insurance policy. So what I heard last night was not satisfactory to cause me to vote for the legislation because it's got so many other problems, which I can detail if you wish. But I'm trying to figure out a way to make the bill not just less bad but good. And so far, I'm not there. And there were no agreements reached last night with the Freedom Caucus and the White House. For that matter, we still don't have a proposal in writing from the White House.
All right, so when you met with the Vice President last night and you seemed to be amenable to his proposal, which was your own proposal, so he's just doing a 360 coming right back at you, Congressman Mo Brooks, saying that, look, these things we can't agree on, let's turn them over to the states, let them deal with it. That was your original idea, but what you're saying is even if they did that, it isn't enough to get you to move with it, right?
No, I'm trying to distinguish between something being embedded in a statute, a federal statute that guarantees that states get to decide what's going to be in health insurance policies involving their state citizens. That's a guarantee, versus what the Vice President was proposing, where the states would come hat in hand and ask permission from the federal government. That's where the states don't have the right to control their own destiny. Rather, they have to walk hat in hand to whoever might be in control of the federal government at that point in time, and the federal government may agree or not agree to give the states the power to control their own destiny. So I want an absolute guarantee of states' rights.
Right, so you want the guarantee.
And I say that in this context, John.
Right.
This legislation, as it is currently drafted, according to the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, increases health insurance premiums in the non-group market 15 to 20% over the next 2 or 3 years, over and above what the premium increases would be under Obamacare. That's not what the American people sent us to Washington, D.C. to do.
Right.
If we give to states the right to determine what's going to be in insurance policies for their own states, then they have the ability to eliminate costly provisions that will then lower the cost of insurance rather than increase it 15 to 20% over and above the Obamacare increases, which is what the CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation are currently telling us will occur under this legislation.
I mean, look, Obamacare right now is still in place. We know those premiums are going up 30%, right? You had another 20%.
Well, they have been going up substantially. It varies from state to state, but the Republican plan would add another 15 to 20% on top of the expected Obamacare premium increases between now and 2018, 2019, according to the Congressional Budget Office financial evaluation and according to the Joint Committee on Taxation's evaluation. And I can read the actual sentence from their report if you want me to, so that you get it firsthand from what they're telling us and advising us. It's not Mo Brooks saying it. It's the CBO warning us that this bill is so bad that it's going to increase health insurance premiums over the next 2 or 3 years by 15 to 20% over and above the Obamacare health insurance premium increases. That's horrific. That's not what people sent us to Washington, D.C. to do. That's one of the reasons why I don't like it in its current form.
All right, and the other thing that, and I agree with you here, let's say we have Joe Biden's going to New Hampshire next week. So let's say we have a President Joe Biden in 2021, then under the Pence proposal that he articulated, nothing in writing, under that plan, the state of Virginia, the state of Alabama, the state of Texas, if they wanted these waivers, they would have to go to the federal government and beg for permission. And Biden would say, no, that's not what we're doing. Sorry.
That's why the Freedom Caucus has not, we did not have a lot of enthusiasm with what the vice president proposed. Now, ideally, what we should be doing, and for the life of me, I don't understand why we're not, is we should be repealing Obamacare. That's what we promised the American people we were going to do. That's what we did, in effect, 2 years ago when the Republican House and the Republican Senate both passed a bill that gutted Obamacare, not 100% repeal, but it did significant damage. And then that was sent to Barack Obama, who vetoed it. And paradoxically, at the time, House Speaker Paul Ryan said, quote, "We have shown now that there is a clear path to repealing Obamacare without 60 votes in the Senate. So next year, if we're sending this bill to a Republican president, it will get signed into law," end quote. I mean, by golly, we did it once before. The Speaker, now Speaker of the House, apparently was very enthusiastic about it when we did it once before. He was anxious to send this same bill to a Republican president. Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, because, Congressman, look, the reality of it is they knew they were playing with rubber bullets and pop guns. It didn't matter, so they sent it to the president. It was a showboat vote, had nothing to do with anything. Now you get to play real. It's like real time, real world, and where's the repeal bill? I mean, you make a very compelling case here. When you have taken this to leadership and just said, let's get this repeal out of committee, and I think you have actually written, sir, you have written a one-page repeal bill, right? One page. That's it.
It's very short.
Double-spaced.
The substance of it is 2 sentences long. One sentence repeals Obamacare. The other sentence repeals a subsequent piece of legislation that the Democrats passed that amended Obamacare. So I repeal both of those. One sentence to each one, boom, gone. Then we revert back to the laws we had in 2009, which, by the way, that was a period of time in which America enjoyed the best health care system in the world at much lower cost to hardworking American families. That seems like a pretty good place to start. And then from there, we can inject change into the healthcare industry as is warranted. For example, interstate competition of health insurance companies. Make them compete against each other. That's a good thing. Competition lowers price, generally speaking, and increases quality of product purchased. We can repeal the antitrust exemptions in the healthcare industry that suppress competition. There are free market reforms that we can implement that will further decrease the cost of health insurance that more people can afford it. So there are lots of things that we can do, but it's all contingent to a repeal of Obamacare that apparently a lot of more and more liberal Republicans have not gotten cold feet about doing.
Right, but they voted for it in the past. So let me
They have voted for it in the past.
I mean, look, in retrospect here, I think now I'm convinced you're doing the right thing. At the beginning, I was like, okay, we want to repeal and replace it with something. We're never going to get there. And now I think you're right. I think you're better off if you repeal it and you just put a timeline on it, like 8 months, 6 months, whatever the period is that goes into effect. Then you got time to work on the various things to fix health care one by one instead of this big omnibus bill, which always seems to be the problem. But let's get to your 2-sentence repeal bill. So what normally happens is you submit that, it gets bottled up in committee, nobody ever votes on it, and that's the end of it. How do you get this thing to the floor where we can get the reality of, I mean, I don't know how you would have voted for repealing Obamacare, sir, in the House 60 times when it didn't matter, and then time number 61, when you're playing in real time where it does matter, you flip on that. How will you even explain that? So how do you get it to the floor of the House? Is that even possible?
Well, there is a significant amount of hypocrisy that you have noted by people who run for Congress, and while they're campaigning, particularly in Republican primaries, they boast about how they're either going to vote to repeal Obamacare or they have voted to repeal Obamacare. And
50
now,
times.
when it counts, when we're using live bullets, so to speak, to use your analogy,
right.
These folks aren't willing to pull the trigger. And ultimately, it is up to the voters of the United States of America to send to Washington, D.C., people who will tell the truth when they're campaigning and then will act on those promises when they're in elected office. And this is, to me, a large degree of this is about keeping our promises to the American people. And the Ryan Care bill, for lack of a better name for it, is not keeping our promise to the American people as I understood our promise. And the Ryan Care bill is very deceptive in that it purports to be a repeal, but if you start looking into the details, in the first page or two it does say that it repeals Obamacare, but in the next 100 pages it reincorporates the substance of Obamacare back into the replacement, particularly the parts of Obamacare that drive up the cost of health insurance beyond the means of working American families. And we do something different, too, John, that is very frustrating. And long term, if you study the political dynamics, it's going to have a huge adverse effect on America. We, the Republicans, their replacement has a huge new welfare program. It's called a refundable tax credit. So, for example, if you're entitled to $10,000 in health insurance subsidies, if you have zero income tax that you pay, then you get $10,000 that is designated to the benefit of the health insurance company of your choice. I mean, that's pure welfare. It's coming from the government. You haven't earned it, and it's paid out. Okay, that's what the refundable word in front of the phrase tax credit means. And what this is going to do, working our way forward, is it's going to create tens of millions of Americans who are now self-sufficient, who are now paying their own way. It's going to convert them into welfare dependents because they're going to be getting these payments directly or indirectly from the United States Treasury. Ultimately, the payments go to the insurance company, but the taxpayer is going to be the beneficiary of those payments. And every election henceforth is going to involve a hue and cry for larger subsidies for the cost of health insurance because the subsidy of the federal government is not keeping up with the cost of the health insurance. And as you make all these voters who are now self-sufficient into welfare dependents, well, how do you think they're going to vote? Who typically, if you're a welfare dependent, who typically do you vote for, a Republican or a Democrat?
They're going to vote for the Democrats.
If you're self-sufficient, you're much more likely to vote for a Republican.
Crazy.
And we're converting tens of millions of voters into welfare dependents. And that's going to have a dramatic adverse effect long-term on America. You're turning the Democratic Party, in effect, over to the Bernie Sanders socialist wing of the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party will morph much more closely in line with what the Democratic Party is today. And the Republican Party, as we know it today, that promotes liberty, freedom, self-sufficiency, smaller government, it will be gone. That to me, is the political dynamic of this legislation if it gets passed because of the new welfare program that is created within it. You're entitled to this welfare if you're a joint tax filer and you earn $150,000 or less. Now, of course, I'm talking about just the given side from the federal government. As you and I know, there is no free lunch. Right. And what that means is, while the government is giving you money with the left hand, its right hand is in your wallet.
Right.
And it's taking the money back, plus a cut for the government, because there is a government bureaucracy created that also must be paid for, as
right.
that right hand is taking your money, keeping a little bit for the government itself, and then with the left hand making you feel good about it by giving you a subsidy for your health insurance.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
And then you create the area of dependency, but who wins? The insurance companies, right? If you follow the money, they were all in favor of this. Yeah, because look, in the 5 years prior to Obamacare, big insurance, there were 350 insurance companies providing health care in America. 5 years after, it goes from 350 to 225. Competition goes down. In the 5 years prior, the 350 companies made a total profit of $8 billion, okay? In the 5 years after, okay, their average profit, $15 billion. So I mean, their profit doubled, and their competition got cut in half. So of course they're going to be for this.
Well, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the direct and indirect payments to the insurance industry, i.e. insurance companies, because of this welfare plan that in Ryan Care, is averaging $35 billion a year. Now, this is the CBO estimate. Let's also bear in mind that the original CBO estimate for the cost of Obamacare was $800 billion over a 10-year period. In 2013, 2014, somewhere in that time frame, that $800 billion estimate had ballooned to $2 trillion. So if anything, you can rely on the CBO and most scorekeepers of this legislation to estimate on the conservative side, when in fact, once you create a welfare program, the actual costs balloon dramatically. And that's in part because these people who examine these financial transactions are not allowed to take into account political dynamics that will ensue.
Right, so they just do a straight spreadsheet. This is the John Fredericks Show across America. We are with Congressman from Alabama, Republican Mo Brooks, member of the Freedom Caucus. He is from the Huntsville area in Alabama, Huntsville, Decatur, Central Alabama, the Alabama Space Coast. Well, there's not a coast there, but the space exploration, if you will.
We're the birthplace of the space program.
Birthplace of the space program. There you go in Huntsville. Been there many times. Sir, we're almost out of time. Final question. So walk us through what happens now as far as it relates to Obamacare, your visit with Mike Pence. How did you guys leave it? What happens now, sir?
The White House is supposed to get to the Freedom Caucus, not a verbal concept of what they're talking about, but a written amendment that we can study and compare to the Ryan Care bill that will enable us to know exactly what it is that we're discussing. At the same time that we're doing that, there'll be all sorts of pressure groups and interest groups that will try to put pressure on the Freedom Caucus to do the wrong thing rather than the right thing. So hopefully, and that's something unique about the Freedom Caucus, we have a lot of people there with high intellect. They understand public policy. For example, Dave Bratt, in your listening audience area, he's one of the good guys. But you have to have more than high intellect. You also have to have backbone to do what is in the best interest of our country. And that backbone means being able to resist the overtures of special interest groups who are more than happy to fill your campaign coffers if you'll do the wrong thing for America. Best for the special interest group, but bad for the country as a whole. So that's what the Freedom Caucus is about. And quite frankly, we're the last conservative bastion on Capitol Hill in the House of Representatives.
All right, sir, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Mo Brooks, Congressman, Central Virginia, Republican, Huntsville area. You can follow him on Twitter at Representative Mo, M-O Brooks. Congressman, it's always an honor to have you on, sir. That was very enlightening.
Keep helping the voters to understand if they are learned, they'll make the right decisions for our country going forward.